to go. Here we go. Y'all may be seated. Welcoming to the stage, Pastor Southern.
All right, good morning. Isn't it nice to see that great big ball of sunshine out there? You know, as I walked in this morning, as I was talking to the guys and saying hello, good morning, you could just tell a difference in the atmosphere, a difference in the attitudes. You know, those guys, they're pretty spicy this morning. And I think it's because the sun is shining, our snowbirds are back, and they brought a little bit of sunshine with them, so thank God for that.
Yes, thank you.
A couple of announcements as we get started. With the sunshine comes the growing grass, and we rejoice with the grass that grows, and we need volunteers to help cut it. So if you're willing to volunteer, we'd love to have your help there. It's in the announcements here. And another thing, you know, as I interact with people, as I meet people and they talk about things that are coming up and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get married. I always say, well, do you have a venue picked out? Because I know a place where they do that kind of thing. And, you know, some people say, well, I want an outdoor wedding. Man, I've got a beautiful pavilion out here, and I've got a beautiful stretch of grass where, you know, people can come and we'll hitch them up. You know, we'll do that. I'm sorry.
We got the garden?
Yeah, we got a garden out here with beautiful flowers. Yeah.
Wild strawberry plants out there
There's
too.
wild strawberry
Yes.
plants to feed the deer, right?
No,
We've got
actually-
wildlife. I mean, there was a groundhog running around. This place is a great place to get married. So, as I
Yes,
meet
it is.
people, I tell them, hey, look, come check us out. We'd love to get you married up, and a big part of that is where we take care of the property. So if you're interested and available, hey, even if you're not interested and only partly available, come on out and help us out, take care of the grounds. With that in mind, on the 2nd of June, we're going to have a work day here on campus. We have a couple of projects that were campus. Is that
Yeah.
the right word?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. On campus. There's no frat parties here on campus. However, we would like to have your help on the 2nd of June. We have a couple projects that have been held over a little bit. We'd love to get those taken care of. So again, we'd love to have your help. 9 o'clock in the morning, there could be donuts. And then just another thing to take a moment and fill out that survey. We're trying to get a men's breakfast going. And so John Fisher is heading that up. If you have questions or comments, direct them towards John. And we'd love to see you get that started too. Let's pray together. Father, you are so incredible. And we just thank you, Lord, that you want to meet with us, that you want to have a relationship with us, Lord. It's humbling to think of all the things that you desire for us, Lord. And Father, as we think today about how you created us in your image, Father, I just pray that we would have that as an idea, Lord, that stays in our minds. That when we get a little too built up, that idea that we're created in your image brings us to humility. And Father, when we get a little bit too low, that the idea that we are created in your image brings us up and gives us the dignity that you have provided for us, Lord. I thank you, Father, for all my friends who are here today, Lord, and I pray that as we look into your word, you'd help us to be and do what you want us to be and do. In Christ's name, amen. Well, this is basically out of Genesis chapter 1, and this is our new series, How to Be Human. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little excited about it because it's new. I am a little bit excited about this. To think about what it means to be a person, and to think about how our personhood engages other people, and what does it mean to be a person involved in a community like a church. So all of those things are things we're going to sort of unpack and explore here at the beginning of the summer, and so I hope you'll enjoy it. Imagine this, that you wake up one morning and there's an alien spaceship parked on your lawn. And the alien is very friendly and speaks English. He comes up and he knocks on your door. And because you're a friendly person, you invite him in for coffee. Come on in, have a seat. You know, and you sit down with the alien and you're having a cup of coffee. And you've got your Pathway business cards close by, so you're thinking, I'm going to invite this guy to church. Right? So as you're thinking, okay, I'm going to invite this guy to church. And you're talking with him, and he's, you know, the kind of chit-chat you have with somebody you just met. Oh, where are you from? Oh, Alpha Centauri. Oh, that's nice. Is it hot there this time of year? You know, chit-chat. And then the alien just sort of gets serious all of a sudden, and he says, what are you? How would you answer that question? What are you? Maybe he's never seen you before. I mean, you've talked about maybe your kids or grandkids. Maybe you've talked about, you know, the nice weather. Maybe you've talked about any number of different things. But he's asking a serious question. What are you? And you start to think about, where do you start with that kind of a question? Maybe you start with chemistry, right? Maybe you start with a bag of chemicals, but you have to be careful. I mean, this is an alien, okay? In the history of human-alien relationships, at least according to Hollywood, it always ends in a fight. So you want to be careful. We don't know what capabilities this alien has. And if you start by talking about how you're made up of chemicals, he might think, oh, chemicals, that's what I make rocket fuel from. I'll make you into rocket fuel. Thanks for your contribution.
Nice.
You might also think, okay, maybe I'm going to start with zoology. I'll start by comparing my humanity with other animals, other beings that are, you know, walk around and do being things. But here again, you have to be careful because we eat animals, right? And how is the alien going to make the distinction between you as a human being and, let's say, a cow? There's something different there. Maybe you go with, what was that, zoology? Maybe you go with sociology. Maybe you start talking about the connections that you have. Your parents who came before you, your children and grandchildren who come after you. But remember, in that social structure, even cows have a social structure, so you're still in danger of being eaten. Maybe you start talking to the alien about artificial intelligence or robotics, and you start to, this is a good question, right? If you're on a website, and what's it going to ask you? Are you a robot?
Yes.
And you just click the box that says no, right? Or maybe there's the stop sign image where you have to pick the squares where there's the stop sign. Have you ever had to do that?
Yep.
Are you a fancy machine? Well, you have to be careful here too, because maybe the alien will plug you into a spaceship and use your brain to help calculate, navigation.
Good luck with that.
I don't know.
Good luck.
We're
Get
going
lost.
to alien life.
Joke's on him.
What are you? Because this is a very fundamental, foundational question. If you don't know what you are, how do you attach meaning and significance to your life? In our exploration of how to be human, we start off with this question, what are you? And the book of Genesis is uniquely suited to address this question. You see, the book of Genesis was written about 3,400 years ago by a guy named Moses. Remember him? Moses was a prophet of God and a leader of the people of Israel, and the people of Israel have been kept in slavery for about 400 years. The Egyptians have been actively trying to undermine their concept of who they are as a people and who they are as individuals. So they're trying to destroy their worldview, and they're trying to replace it with something more Egyptian. So Moses writes this. They've been led out of this slavery, so their bodies are free, but their minds are still sort of confused as to who they are. And so when Moses writes Genesis, he starts at the beginning to reorient them in the world, to talk about their God as distinct from the gods of the Egyptians and Babylonians and Assyrians. We'll talk about those guys here in a minute. Moses starts at the beginning, which records the creation of everything by the word of God and the birth of the nation of Israel. And this is the ancient nation of Israel. The modern state of Israel wasn't recreated until 1947. Everett Fox says this: 3 principal themes emerge from the great creation account with which Genesis opens. The first is the total and uncompromised power of God as creator. The second, the intrinsic order and balance of the created world. And the third, humankind's key position in the scheme of creation. Our key position in creation helps us define who we are and how we relate to other people. We enter the Genesis account at the highest point of creation, the creation of man. As we seek to explore how to be human, we start with what it means to be human. Let's take a look together at Genesis chapter 1, and I'll start at verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. So on the 6th day of creation, at the height, he's created everything. He's placed the sun and the moon in its place. He's created the oceans and the sky. He fills those with its inhabitants. And on the last day of creation, he created humanity. He created us. And then he creates us different from all of that. He creates us in his image. That's a fascinating idea, isn't it? That you are the pinnacle of God's creation. You're something that God very specifically wanted to create to represent who He is in the world. Scary too, isn't it? You are created in the image of God. Man's creation in the image of God stands in remarkable contrast to other cultures in the ancient Near East. They had a concept of man being created in God's image, but it wasn't every man, and it certainly wasn't every woman. It was the king. The Assyrians had a proverb that goes like this: a free man is as the shadow of God. The slave is as the shadow of a free man. But the king, he is like unto the very image of God. You see, the Assyrians want people to understand their place. Image of God, yes. The king has that. You don't. So get back to work. Right? That's the Assyrian concept of humanity. There's an image of God, but you're not it. The Egyptians also identified the king, and only the king, with the image of God. Of the gods, small g. And the Egyptian gods were also often in the form of a man combined with some sort of animal. Other ancient civilizations, and this is very common, other ancient civilizations have a very human idea of the gods. They married and had children. They fought one another. They created man to do the work that they didn't want to do. The people of Israel were likely influenced by some of these ideas. They've been slaves for hundreds of years, and they've lost some sense of their identity. Moses was inspired by God to write that all men and all women were created in God's image. Not just the king, not just the free man, every man. And Moses wrote that to a generation of people whose bodies are free, but whose minds are still enslaved to that idea. This incredible idea gives equal dignity to the king and the slave alike. To you and to me, and to every human being ever created, they're created in the image of God. The text of Genesis uses two key words related to the image of God in this text. The first is image, and the second is likeness. I'm going to leave you with some Hebrew words, so I'll introduce them here. Tselem is the idea of image, and demuth is the idea of likeness. So you're created in the tselem of God. The word tselem describes an image like a statue. It's well-rounded. It's a full depiction of something else. Statues were often used to portray the rule of a king, so you wouldn't have the presence of the king everywhere, but you would have his statue placed all throughout your country as a very vivid reminder of whose country you were in, right? Because you could see the image of the king. The word image is very similar to this kind of image, right? I used to drive these. Well, not these, right? Because the door opens, but I'm not going to fit. I heard you, Heinz.
Now it's Heinz. Ooh.
Look, it's even got an engine.
Wow.
Great fuel economy. This is an image. This is a model. You can look at the engine. You can open the door. There's probably even a cup of coffee and some coffee stains on the carpet. It's an image of something much bigger. It's like it, but it's not exactly like it. You can't hook up a trailer. Well, you can't hook up a trailer to it, but it's a toy trailer as well. And yes, I do have the toy trailer. Yes, it's in my office. The image and likeness describe the form of something. And that's similar to what we are. We're created in the image and likeness of God. D.J.A. Kleins says this: by the doctrine of the image of God, Genesis affirms the dignity and worth of man and elevates all men, not just kings or nobles, to the highest status conceivable, short of complete divinization. Divinization is just a fancy word that means God didn't make us little gods. He made us in His image. The words image and likeness in their context here show that humanity is not a little God, but we're created in a way that represents the characteristics of God. And God did this for all of humanity. And He created us a unity of the immaterial parts, our soul, our spirit, and the material parts, our body, in a concept called the psychosomatic unity. Now, that seems like a big word, psychosomatic. Go use it with your kids and grandkids. So you little psychosomatic unity, you. Psycho means mind, soul, body, and somatic means body. Okay, or mind, soul, spirit, and body. So you put those two words together, and there's a unity in you of body and spirit. You're a combination. And these elements only separate when you die. When God relates to mankind, He takes on a form that we understand. When God wanted to be a representation to us, He sent His Son Jesus, and He put Jesus in a body to relate to us. So your body is important. It's an aspect of the image of God. Now, God doesn't have a body. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that God's, sitting up in heaven in His easy chair watching television. Okay? He's a spirit. But when He chose to make us in His image, He chose to give us a body. And that gives your body dignity. When you think about the combination of your inner person and your body, you realize that it's hard to have emotions without having it wrapped up in flesh, right? When you're angry, what happens? You can see it. When you're sad, you can see it. When you're getting tired and bored because it's a little bit warm in here, I can see it. Look up. God doesn't have a body. But He created us in a psychosomatic unity of soul and body, and they're intimately connected. And it's interesting and it's very theologically important to realize that in Scriptures, the image of God in man is never destroyed. Psalm 8 says this. Psalm 8 is an obvious riff on Genesis. But Psalm 8, verses 3 through 9 says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor." So Psalm 8, written after Genesis, picks up the idea of the image. And it says, you are crowned with glory and honor. The Apostle Paul also does this in 1 Corinthians. So even later, thousands of years later, Paul says this, "A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man." Now look, it doesn't say woman is the image of man. It says woman is the glory of man, because man and woman are both created equally in God's image. That's what Genesis says. Genesis says it, the Psalms repeat it after the fall of man. And then Paul repeats it all the way in the New Testament. So the image of God in Scripture is never destroyed. And that means that just like they were created in God's image, you're created in God's image as well. Yes, damaged. Yes, mired in sin. Yes, clouded. But nonetheless, at the foundation, the bedrock base idea is that you are created in God's image. The image of God gets obscured, but never destroyed. Where do you start when you start explaining what it means to be human? Moses starts with your creation in the image of God, body and soul, and this gives dignity to your entire being. The image of God helps you overcome the overwhelming flaws of being human. We live in a fallen world. The image of God is clouded by sin, but it's never destroyed. So when you experience soul-crushing failure in your life, when you're fired from a job, you get a bad performance review, you're still created in God's image.
That's right.
When you experience moral failure, when you sin in a way that just creates horrible wreckage in your life and the lives of other people, you're still created in God's image, and there's a way to proceed in restoration of those relationships. Whether you're young and strong, both of you that are here with us today, whether you're young and strong, whether you're in the middle of your life, whether you're an old man or an old woman, you're created in God's image.
That's right.
If you go to People of Walmart, you'll see that God has a sense of humor too.
That's right.
It's okay, I've probably been on.
Oh.
When you're unjustly accused of something, when you're the victim of abuse or neglect, you are created in God's image. You can have a full and rewarding life. And sometimes what has to happen is when you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth and you look in the mirror, you've got to remind yourself that you're created in God's image. Because that picks you up when you're down. And sometimes when you look in the mirror and you think, man, I'm looking really good today. You have to remember that you're created in God's image, and that brings you down to reality. Because God is a servant. God is one who does for others what they can't do for themselves. The image of God is a powerful, powerful idea. So when an alien shows up and asks, what are you? You can say, I am the creation of an all-powerful God. Well, you can't eat that, can you? You can't turn that into rocket fuel. You've got questions if you're an alien. You can't be fed to his children, subjected to experiments. God is the creator of everything. You are made in his image. The image of God describes what you are as a human being. And another aspect of this text in Genesis is this. Humanity is created in the image of God. And God gives us authority over creation. This is a powerful idea as well. Because maybe the alien shows up and says, okay, I can't touch you. I'll just go consume all the animals or all the resources or all the everything else. But you've been given dominion over that. You see this in verse 26. God intends that man rule over the fish, birds, and animals. And then he commands the same thing in verse 28. And remember that Moses is writing this to Hebrew people who've just been led out of Egyptian slavery. What do the Egyptian gods look like? Animals. Who created the animals?
God did.
Your God. So who created the Egyptian gods? There's a little bit of neater here in the Bible. That's what's happening. You see, in the text, the fish are given their domain in the sea, the birds are given their domain in the sky, and the animals are given their domain on the land. Each created being has its place, ordained by God, filled by God, your God, in contrast to the other ancient creation myths. And man is given authority to rule over each of these domains, and the word for ruling suggests domination. But that's not always a bad thing. I mean, don't we have to dominate the weeds to plant good crops? I mean, if you have a garden, and I hope that you do, because I am often the recipient of your generosity. Right? We don't need to plant tomatoes, dear. We just need friends who plant tomatoes.
I can't eat a fire.
Yeah, Brian already took care of us, honey. We've got tomato plants.
To get fresh
Oh,
tomatoes.
If you have a garden, you have to take care of the weeds. You have to dominate the weeds. Otherwise, the same thing's true of the animals, right? If you plant stuff in your garden and the deer show up, you have to chase the deer away. You have to dominate in order to produce what you need. God, the creator and owner of everything, delegates his rulership over these domains to humanity. We are the stewards of creation and responsible to use it under God's authority. Based on this text, man is superior to the animals as the special creation of God. The plants are given to you for your food. Well, there's a religious aspect to this as well. Other religions, like the Egyptians and Babylonians, they were polytheistic. They worshiped many different gods. And so you'd have to sort of know which god went with what problem to get a solution here. In the Babylonian creation story, the two main gods are fresh water and salt water. And they create secondary gods. So two main gods, they create another level of gods, and then they get very upset because the young gods are noisy. This sounds like having children and grandchildren, right? So the two main gods create these other gods. They're too noisy, and they have a disagreement. Hey, let's kill them. You're going to kill a god? But in the Babylonian creation story, you can do that. Well, the Babylonians, a champion rises up and kills the saltwater god and uses her body to create the earth and the skies. The champion also kills the saltwater god's husband and uses his blood to create man, and man was created to do the work that the gods don't want to do. That's the Babylonian creation story. These gods sound a lot like people. They fight, they die, they use humans to do their work. In the Babylonian view of man, we're built for work. So what good are you if you can't work? The Hebrew people might be distracted by these alternative religions. They've heard these creation stories, and Moses is writing Genesis to get them straight. Our God is the absolute master of creation. He establishes the order of everything. The salt water is an ocean, and God put it in its place. The fresh water is freshwater, lakes. God put it in its place. Our God put those gods in their place. Right? Neener. The Babylonians weren't the only ones. Our God is the absolute master of creation. He creates the order. He puts fish in the sea, and fish don't fly. I mean, I realize there are flying fish, but fish, generally speaking, don't fly. Birds don't live underwater, and animals live on the land, generally speaking. The Babylonians weren't the only ones who were polytheistic and confused. The Egyptians also worshipped many different gods, and many of these gods had human and animal features. The Egyptian god of the sun, Ra, is featured with the body of a man and the head of a falcon. That's him over here on the right. Well, if you're a Hebrew and you look at that picture, after you've read what Moses wrote, you can see, my God created all of that. Because that's the sun on top of his head. Who created the sun, Christians?
God did that.
God did. Who created the birds?
God.
Huh. And what about the guy with the head of a dog? That's Anubis, the Egyptian god of the underworld. Who created the dogs?
God.
God did. Who created man?
God did.
Huh. I really like the Egyptian goddess Heket, which is the next slide, because she has the head of a frog.
There you go.
Egyptians are weird. The Hebrews worship the Creator. The Egyptians are worshiping the creation. And so there's a huge aspect here of Moses reminding the Hebrew people where they came from. He's telling them who they are. They are created in God's image and placed above the creation. When you explain this to the alien, you place humanity in a context. Man is God's representational ruler of creation. And if the alien is polite, he'll come and you'll sit down with coffee and you'll say, hey, I realize that you came here for a reason. If you want to spend some dollars on vacation, that's great. But if you came here to take over, I'm sorry. But God already gave us everything. And God created us in His image. And so you're going to have to go try someplace else. Take a left at the moon and see what you can find. The alien can't destroy humanity without violating the image of God. He can't consume the animal resources without humanity's permission. They've been given to us to use. We've been given rulership over them. This is why every alien invasion movie becomes a fight. Mankind is given authority over the creation to be managed and cared for. Stuff is a good servant, but a lousy master. And so don't get distracted by stuff. You know, this is when we talk about materialism. Materialism is worship of the creation, worship of the stuff. The formal definition is this: a tendency to consider material possessions and physical comfort as more important than spiritual values. When I think about the idea of materialism, I think about, we all have cell phones. Almost all of us, right? I was excited about my first cell phone. It could make phone calls almost wherever I was. And then I got my second cell phone. You know what they did after that? They came out with a new cell phone. It had a screen and you could have and a keyboard. Screen and a keyboard in one phone. That's amazing. That's not my current cell phone. My current cell phone is this one, and it's getting to be my old cell phone.
Did you see that? He looked at me.
Yeah. I looked at Moneybags over here. It's okay to have a cell phone. It's okay to have a new cell phone. But if you're having a new cell phone after a new cell phone, a new computer after new computer, new stuff after new stuff after new stuff, maybe it's becoming a focus. And we need to be careful that we don't allow the creation a higher place than God gave it. God gave the creation something for you to be a steward over. And so all of the resources that you have are yours to be stewarded and watched over carefully. We're created in the image of God, and we're given authority over creation to maintain it and care for it as God's representative. And the final thing that we're going to talk about here is that everyone is created in God's image. This is a powerful idea. Because what happens a lot of times is we set up someone as the other. Oh, this person is different from me, they're the other. It happens quite frequently in race relations, where we see someone who has a different color or different creed, and we say, oh, they're different from us, they're the other, they must all be bad. Well, that's not true. The image of God is a foundational idea in our lives because all of humanity, Christian or not, is created in God's image. To be human and to be the image of God are not separable. When people lose this idea that we're created in God's image, it has profound effects on our culture. When you think about this in our modern society, you realize it's a lost concept. I was talking to a friend of mine, Chris, this week, and he's a PhD student. He actually just got an internship with MIT Lincoln Labs, and apparently this is a big deal. Now, Chris is on the one hand brilliant, and on the other hand, he's very humble about it. You see, he realizes that God has put him in that place to represent Christianity to a culture where they don't think about anything external to themselves. Let me quote my friend Chris. He said, God is nowhere on their minds. He said, let me correct myself. The idea of believing in something external to oneself is foreign to them. And so what are you left with? You're left with comparison. You're left in a room full of very smart people thinking, I think I'm a little bit smarter. Well, you know what you're going to do eventually? You're going to meet somebody who's smarter than you. Or you might look in the mirror and think, I'm pretty good looking. Well, you know what's going to happen? You're going to meet somebody better looking than you are. I'm going to resist talking about somebody that we talked about yesterday. Let the reader understand. The guy with pretty eyes.
Oh, I'm like, what are you talking about? One day he's going to show up at church.
Yeah, he's got pretty eyes. In my friend's community, you can only measure yourself by comparing yourself with other people. When you abandon what God says as a culture, you only have comparison. You only have your inner voice to decide who you are and what you are. Well, I don't know about you, but my inner voice needs a good smack from time to time. It usually needs a good smack from the Word of God to get me reoriented to what God says about me, what God says about you, and what God says about the future. When you lose the concept of God and being created in His image, you set yourself above or below other people. Philosophers and social commentators have noticed this shift. One of them describes the modern worldview this way: there is an innately good, true self which can be trusted, consulted, and gotten in touch with. Your personal feelings are the best guide for what is right and wrong. I was going to say, what do you think about that, Christian? But I've already heard from Christian. It's a bad idea.
Amen.
Another one says this: clear knowledge of right and wrong disintegrated, and the possibility of salvation, of knowing even how to live a good life, was lost. With this profound shift in American culture, the self was no longer situated by a tangible set of beliefs detailing what it meant to be human. These are secular authors writing about the situation in people that we interact with all the time. They don't know what it means to be human. In Scripture, this is the same situation that Moses encountered with the slaves who've been brought body out of Egypt, but their minds are still caught up in slavery. These comments point out that the people that we talk to every day have lost their sense of identity. They end up comparing themselves and comparing themselves with other lost people. And this comparison gets amplified through social media. We end up publishing our best moments on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and then comparing ourselves with other people's highlights. You know, it's really hard to compare your real life with somebody's fake Facebook life. I don't know how you use Facebook. I put pictures of my grandkids and, you know, invitations to come to church. Hey, we're having a good time. Come out and join us. By the way, cute grandkid. I don't show you pictures of those little monsters when they're being monsters. Yesterday, they were in the driveway. Now, we just moved to a very nice neighborhood. We really like it. And my 3-year-old grandson, not Zeke, was in the driveway. They were playing outside just all day long, playing outside. And he's from the country, where there's not a whole lot of neighbors. And he had to go potty.
Uh-oh.
He drops his drawers
Water the grass.
and waters the lawn. And of course, Ezekiel sees this, and so he's the 4-year-old. He drops his drawers, and he waters the lawn. And the 2-year-old little girl, she sees what the boys are doing. She drops her drawers, and so now all of my grandchildren who can walk are in my front yard
Half naked.
going to the bathroom.
Half naked.
I don't know if I can publish that on Facebook. I'm a little bit ashamed to admit it even now. Welcome to the neighborhood. Who's that? Oh, yeah, that's the pastor's house. I don't publish the moments when my grandchildren are being difficult. I don't publish when she and I are having a fight, even though it's rare. I don't publish when I'm having a bad day. All my Facebook stuff is the highlight reel. It's tough to compare to that highlight. David Brooks says this is a little bit long. This technology creates a culture in which people turn into little brand managers, using Facebook, Twitter, text messages, and Instagram to create a falsely upbeat, slightly over-exuberant, external self that can be famous first in a small sphere and then with luck in a large one. The manager of this self measures success by the flow of responses it gets. The social media maven spends his or her time creating a self-caricature, a much happier and more photogenic version of real life. People start subtly comparing themselves to other people's highlight reels, and of course, they feel inferior. Losing the concept of being created in God's image means that modern culture has lost its frame of reference. There's no external standard by which you can measure your identity. Modern people get lost in these comparisons. Eventually, someone is smarter, someone is more attractive, more successful, and you don't measure up. It's as if the goalposts keep moving. The people we meet every day struggle to know what it means to be human. They don't have an answer for the alien, and often the alien is themselves because they don't even know who they are. The biblical perspective on humanity starts with this: you are created in the image and likeness of God. And this provides dignity and meaning for your life. We are all equally created in God's image. The image is distorted by sin. There's no question about that. But at a very deep foundational level, everyone you meet is created in God's image. We have an answer to the "what are you" question that the world around us really needs to see in the way we value other people. You see, the other person is someone who is very different from you, even someone who makes you uncomfortable. C.S. Lewis said this: it may be possible for each to think too much of his own potential glory. It is hardly possible to think too often or too deeply about that of his neighbor. You see, the image of God changes the respect you have for the other person, especially when they have clouded that image through sin. When we think about the other person, when we think about sinners, when we think about unchurched people, when we think about gay people or transgender people, they are still created in the image of God. They've just messed up maybe a little bit differently than you and I have. When we think about people who are suffering with depression, they're still created in the image of God. When we think about people who have been through an abortion, or even those people who have performed abortions, they're created in the image of God. And this changes the way that we value them. We can't look down at them because they're created in God's image. We can't look up at them because we're created in God's image. We're all created in the image and likeness of God. People of different races, people who are racist, are created in God's image. People who have wronged us. You see, image is the key idea for loving broken people, even when that broken person is us. When you think about how to be human, you start with what it means to be human. A human being is created in God's image at the bedrock foundation level. And this leads us to be at the forefront of respect for ourselves and respect for people who are other than us. You are created in God's image. You are endowed with power over the created world as God's representative. And you must view other people as equally bearers of God's image, even those who have clouded the image by sin. Thousands of years ago, the Hebrew people have forgotten their identity during the long slavery in Egypt. Moses leads their bodies out, and he writes Genesis to bring their minds out of slavery. Thank God, because this also applies to us as well. You are created in God's image. I doubt you're going to find an alien spaceship parked in your driveway anytime soon. But you'll find a world full of people who don't know what they are. And they're just kind of stumbling through life, trying to make it as best they can. But you've got an answer from the page of Scripture. They're created in God's image. I promise to leave you with some Hebrew. Now, I told you I studied Hebrew. I don't make any great claims to know Hebrew. But this is Tselem Elohim, image of God. So say it with me. Tselem Elohim.
Elohim.
Tselem Elohim. You are created, Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And that's true for every person that you meet. That gives them dignity. And you as a Christian should be able to show them, even people that you are so mad at that you could just spit. Even people that disgust you, they're created in the image of God. They're worthy of respect. And we're the ones who carry that. Because we know Tselem Elohim. When you get too high, the image of God brings you down to a nice, level normal. And when you get too low, the image brings you up. It gives you your self-respect and dignity. And sometimes you have to remind yourself 100 times a day, as you look in the mirror, I'm created in the image of God. As the guys get ready for the offering, as the worship team comes up. I got a phone call one time from someone who, objectively was a dangerous person. And I had to talk to him. And I had to give him respect, even though he was angry and racist, because he's created God's image. So when you interact with somebody this week, remember, they're created in the image of God. Lord God, as we come before you, how humbling it is to think that you created us as your representative in this world. And Father, how much dignity that provides us with, Lord. It's almost like I don't have a reason to have a bad day, because I'm created in your image. And Father, everyone here is created in your image. Everyone out there is created in your image. I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to have a vision of respect for humanity, Lord. As we meet people who are mired by sin, as we meet people that just rub us the wrong way, Lord, help us to have an image or an understanding that they're created, Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And I pray, Father, that you would help us with this offering, Lord, that you would be glorified in it, that it would provide for the needs of the church, Lord, that we would have an abundance, not to sit on an abundance, but to use that abundance for your glory, Father. Thank you, Lord, for your word. And thank you for your Son, Jesus. In his name, amen.
Lord, you have my heart, and I will search for you. Jesus, Father God, thank you so much for who you are. And Lord, thank you for creating us in your image. God, it's a pretty awesome reminder that every time we run into somebody else, whether they be different, whether it be somebody who's hard to love, or whether they be somebody who doesn't want to love us and is actively being a big pain in the toots, you created that person to be in your image. I'd like to thank you for the reminder that you acted like you have, to be hated and to want people back. Lord, I just pray that we can go into the world and we can be reminded of that. We might be the only Jesus that some people get to see. And I just pray that you keep that on our minds. We treat people the way that you treat us. It's your Son, Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. You guys are dismissed.
What are you guys doing today?
Today,